Hey, everybody, I'm John Halpin. Welcome to Broadhead HMH's Future of Transportation podcast. I'm here in this episode, as always, to continue our series of chats with experts in the transportation industry. With me today is Robby Hamby, Director of Commercial Product Strategy for EV Tires at Bridgestone. Robby, how you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. So,
thanks for having me.
Yeah. So for full disclosure, everybody, Bridgestone's a client of ours, not a client of mine. I don't work on your account. So some of this is new to me. And I'm assuming it's going to be new to people listening too, in some cases. So how are EV tires different from regular tires for an internal combustion engine car? I didn't know there was a difference. Can you kind of explain what the difference is?
Well, I think most consumers may not think there's a real difference, but it's really not the performance itself, but maybe the performance criteria that is different for EVs versus traditional ICE vehicles from that standpoint, really around the performance requirements. Mainly focus on low capacity requirements due to the batteries of the vehicle itself. Typically rolling resistance, as the EVs look for something with low rolling resistance, and wear. Wear can be an issue, especially with the torque on some of those EV vehicles, as they do tend to accelerate quickly, but that can do the powertrain, but those can be adjusted through the vehicle settings from that standpoint. Okay,
so why? So for, let's say, commercial vehicle, why is the load capacity important from a tire standpoint?
Really, to carry the load. If you think about transportation for commercial vehicles, they're hauling goods from point A to point B. So there's a limit on the load capacity. So anything you add to that, the tires will need to be able to handle that additional load of an EV vehicle.
So there's additional, it's because of the battery makes it.
Yeah, the battery. If you think about it, commercial vehicles are bigger, so the battery is vehicle, so additional load capacity is required to support the load of the vehicle.
Got it. So in addition to helping the vehicle and the performance of the vehicle, like you said, how does the right tire have an environmental impact?
Well, I think two things we can talk about. Rolling resistance, as I mentioned, the better the tire is for rolling resistance, the less fuel consumption, but in this case, there may be energy needed to move the vehicle, so you can extend the distance of an EV vehicle, which will be critical. And ultimately, if you can improve wear, that's less raw materials that be needed to produce new tires from that standpoint. So from an environmental standpoint, we look at it two ways: to reduce the energy consumption by having better low resistance, and ultimately better wear to reduce the raw materials needed to make new tires.
I want to talk to you about some new Bridgestone commercial EV products. For the first one, so you recently released a tire. Is the R192E? That's the best, or is 192 or
R192E? Correct. We launched that earlier this year.
Okay, and that's for electric buses.
Yes, that was our first tire specifically designed for electric buses in that size. Again, it has additional load capacity to carry that additional load for an EV vehicle. In addition, it has ultra low rolling resistance to support the needs of that vehicle as well. And one other feature, as you think about EVs and the noise, it does have a pattern design within the tread groove fence, is what we're calling it, to help abate the noise of the vehicle or tire as well for the vehicle.
Okay, so what makes Bridgestone say, hey, we need to manufacture an EV tire for buses? Is it just kind of like, hey, another opportunity we do it for buses here and dump trucks there, and is it just another niche, or did this niche jump out at you guys?
I think we think about the evolution of EV vehicles for commercial. We do see it being maybe focused initially on buses and maybe even dump trucks, where the route is maybe shorter than you think about long haul applications. So it makes sense that we'll see a faster adoption in those segments within the commercial space. So we targeted working with some OEs to develop our first specifically designed EV tire for a bus. Now, again, it's not specifically for EV tires. It can be used on traditional ICE vehicles as well.
Got it. Okay. So when you talked about buses, so let's say short haul applications, right? Is part of that being driven by, and I asked this on, I feel like I've asked this a lot lately to people about municipalities driving emission standards and things like that, and kind of, forcing the hand of the manufacturers to make more electric buses?
I think that will happen over time. I think as bigger fleets become more conscious of the impact and see the benefits of EV vehicles. We'll see that. I think the biggest, as I mentioned, is the distance. If you think about long haul commercial vehicles going coast to coast, got to have that reliability to be able to get there and return. And, is there the charging stations there to support that? Probably not yet, but I think it will be. So you'll see, I think, the immediate focus for commercial will be those routes where they go out and come back home in the same day, or minimal distance travel to maximize the benefit of EV vehicles.
Gotcha. Okay, so Bridgestone as a whole is, we talked about here, and there's performance and there's demand for you guys, right? Mm-hmm. And that's obviously important, and you're filling that. But Bridgestone wants to become, I'm going to use a quote here, a global leader in sustainable mobility. Can you tell me kind of what that means and what that's being driven by?
Yeah, we want to create industry-leading products and solutions, but with that sustainability message. And we've set some pretty lofty targets for that by reducing our CO2 emissions by 2050, as well as being 100% recyclable, renewable materials by 2050 for that, just to provide, premium product, but also taking a position on being environmental friendly and supporting those initiatives for that.
You started in this business and there was the material sourcing was probably pretty standard.
Yes.
And now it's not. It's changed a lot. How's that change your job?
It's changed a lot, to your point, and I think a lot of it is how we see the future. What will be the next source of materials to replace oil derivative products for tire making, right? There's options, whether it's recyclable or reclaimed carbon black, recyclable steel. There's options out there. I just think over time, as those become more developed, you'll see a natural change over to those type of materials in the production of tires in the future.
How are you adapting for more innovations in EV technology? I talked about, your background. You probably, this business was probably, it had some rules and standards, and I guess things were probably easier. However, when you started in this, than it is now, because there's innovation around the corner every day. How do you guys adapt to that, and how does your job adapt to that? And basically planning ahead when you can't plan as far ahead as maybe you used to.
Correct. And I think you think about the true design of the tire may have not changed a lot. Yeah. But it's what we have to do to factor into that, as I mentioned, some of the attributes from carrying capacity and wear. Do we have to look at improved technologies from compounding to manufacturing some of the products, components that go into it to address those needs from that? And I think that's the biggest change that we've seen is how do we come out with materials to target those specific performance requirements that's changed and will continue to change with EV vehicles in the future.
Can you talk to me, and this is another one that I'm sure my colleagues know more than I do, about retreading. But why is it so, it's more efficient than buying new tires, but can you kind of explain how that works and why it's a more efficient way to go for commercial vehicles?
Well, if you think about the amount of material that would be able to produce a new tire versus the retread. And again, retreads are 100% safe. And as we think about EVs, it just makes even more sense as we become more conscious of the environment and the impact of that. Retread makes even more sense. Again, to get more retreads out of that new tire to, extend the life of the casing itself, and then be able to retread that for not only EV vehicles, but traditional vehicles. With our full line of Bandag offerings, we think we are the leader in that industry in terms of retread and how that can impact both the fleet from a business standpoint, but also from the environmental standpoint they can do by basically retread or recycling that product for additional life of a new tire.
Okay, so if I have an electric bus or electric bus fleet, how do I go about getting tires? How do I get my tires retreaded? What's the process?
No different than you would do now. Our retread is through our massive dealer network throughout the country. Yeah. So whatever dealer that supports your business will have the same technology needed to retread a traditional bus or an EV bus. we'll develop not only new tires for that, but new retreads to maximize that performance of that tire on that EV vehicle in the future. So that process will not change. It will just adapt to what's needed from a performance standpoint.
Got it. Okay. But that, like you said, the process is similar, whether it's EV or not EV.
Yeah, very similar from a retread standpoint.
The value of what you save versus getting a new tire is probably the same. I mean, the environmental impact's different because the raw material sourcing is different, but is the value the same, like the savings the same essentially?
Yeah, the savings would be the same, and our goal is to ultimately increase the number of retreads for a bus or a traditional commercial vehicle. And that's what we see as the future as this continues to evolve. So as we get more focus on mobility solutions and technology, so we can understand the health of that casing and try to maximize the value of that to the dealers, both from a financial standpoint, as I mentioned, but also from an environmental standpoint to be able to retread that tire as much as possible.
Got it. Going bigger picture on vehicle electrification, which has, it's funny. We started this podcast almost 2 years ago, as I felt like it was. I think I referenced a couple of times. Remember the Super Bowl where GM went all in on the EVs? I was kind of like, holy cow! Everything changed all of a sudden. Like it was sort of, there was a tipping point that all the OEMs wanted to get into this. I know that's consumer. What's that? How do you see being on the commercial side of electrification? How do you see the commercial and consumer segments as being different and how they're progressing in electrification and all that stuff?
I think they're similar in what's driving it, both from a fuel savings and, again, the environmental impact of it. I think consumer, just from the sheer application and size of the vehicle, will convert sooner. But I do expect to see that continue in the commercial. I think it will start with smaller vehicles, say maybe a class 4 or 5 vehicle, as we've talked about, as you see, right, especially as last mile delivery has continued to grow over the last couple of years. And then also, I think, focus on some of the urban routes, maybe regional. Then I think it'll extend into the traditional long haul that maybe most people are thinking about with an 18 wheeler that you see driving down the interstate going, fairly long distances. It eventually will evolve to that as the technology within batteries becomes better. You'll see that become fully adopted in the future for commercial vehicles.
So did you actually think that from what you've observed, you talked about last mile delivery, are the last mile delivery, are the trucks, are they going to wind up competing with like cargo bikes and scooters and stuff like that at some point? Because I mean, there's a lot of last mile delivery going on with that stuff too, right?
There's some, right? I think it all depends on the product itself, right? Obviously, you'll have some of the more traditionals that you see out in the road now, your FedEx or UPSs. Mm-hmm. You'll see more of that with Amazon and emerging fleets like that take shape in terms of that. So the future of those vehicles, I think is still somewhat unknown. I think it's where it's key for us to work closely with not only the traditional OEMs, but the emerging OEMs, to be sure that we are doing our part to help develop the products that will maximize their need from that standpoint to support their EV vehicles and traditional vehicles as well.
Got it. Yeah, I'm not in an urban setting, so it's definitely going to be vehicle four-wheelers for a while.
Yeah, here in Nashville, we see a lot of it. Even in my neighborhood, just south of Nashville, you see a lot of it. It's amazing the number of deliveries within a subdivision that occurs on a daily basis. Oh,
absolutely. I live in a cul-de-sac, and basically there's an Amazon truck driving up here every hour. Exactly. So, yeah, I'm waiting for a drone to deliver my stuff. No offense to the commercial vehicle industry, but I'm looking forward to that sometime. Okay. So what are other, I'm trying to think of other drivers for adoption on the commercial side. We talked about fuel savings. Mm-hmm. I mentioned municipalities driving. Is there any other things that I haven't mentioned that are driving EV adoption for commercial vehicles?
At some point, we always have to consider government regulations. I think that will kind of accelerate that. But I think those two are the biggest drivers that we see that will drive EV forward in our industry, especially the commercial side. Who knows what those will be, but we know it's coming. So we need to prepare for that and be ready for that next phase of electrical vehicles.
Okay. So what are so I talked about the main drivers. What about reasons for hesitation? I mean, I'm sure you hear from dealers and from customers in the commercial space. What is causing people not to make the investment? And that might be a leading question right there.
Yeah, I think we talked about a little bit is the battery life and the distance traveled for some commercial applications. I think that is probably still the biggest fear. I mean, the worst is you don't want to go on a cross-country trip and get stranded because of the battery life in range. Now, I think that'll improve over time, and you'll see less hesitation in those segments as we move forward as well.
Are you seeing, from where you're sitting, are you seeing less hesitation already? Has that changed over the last 2-3 years?
Yeah, I think definitely over the last couple of years, you've seen more, and we continue to work with those OEMs to make sure we provide that product and work with them as where they see their next advancement in terms of that. Is it these regional carriers that may go and back the next day? As we work with them, what is going to be that requirement? What's that battery look like? As we talked about, in terms of load capacity, does that mean it gets bigger? So do we need to be thinking about what that looks like for us from a tire design standpoint to support the more traditional and in actuality the largest segment of our market, which is the long haul regional applications, much bigger from a commercial tire sales than some of the other ones in terms of just pure units.
Okay, so are any and I don't know if you know this, so are any of the for increased range as of right now, basically the more range the bigger the battery and the heavier the battery, which matters to your tires.
Correct.
Are batteries getting able to, is technology allowing batteries to get smaller and with the same range increases?
I'm not an expert on batteries, but
right.
I would hope that is the evolution with that, because that would make things much simpler from that standpoint and not drastically impact our structure from a commercial side. There's a lot of infrastructure already built to support the current business, so we need that to be similar or without any major disruptions in how the commercial business works.
Got it.
To adapt to potentially bigger tires, but tires with additional load capacity.
Yep. Okay. Do you think this is the last one. What are I talked about hesitation from some customers. What are do you hear misconceptions about electrification? Like I think that from a consumer standpoint, people worry about range. They probably don't really have to, What about from a commercial standpoint?
I still think that's still the biggest one that just has a doubt in their mind. I think maybe that fear of being stranded per se is still probably the biggest misconception. And again, we expect that to improve over the years. Yeah. So I think that will be eliminated as we move forward. And really, from that standpoint, I don't see any hesitations from that standpoint with people adopting EV vehicles in the future.
Good. That's good for you. You guys working on, on that side of the business. That's great. Right?
It's great for us because we want to continue to develop new products. As you mentioned, we talked about the R192E. That was our first launch for tire design for EV vehicles. We continue to work on more and hope to have those ready in the future as we expect this segment to grow within the commercial business.
All right, folks, we're gonna wrap it up right there. Robby, this was really educational. Like I said, my colleagues know more than I do about your business, but it was really interesting to learn all this stuff, so I appreciate it.
No, thank you. It was great to be here and look forward to it again sometime.
That sounds great. Folks, you can learn more about Bridgestone at their website, bfusa.com, and on social media platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter. Robby, again, really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. I hope we can do it again sometime.
All right. Thank you.
All right, folks, if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you may be watching and listening. It'll help us get the word out, and we really appreciate it. To learn more about Broadhead HMH, the Transportation Transformation Agency, visit hmhagency.com or find us on all the usual social media platforms. For Robby Hamby, I'm John Halpin. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with a new episode of the Future Transportation Podcast.